When you put in the work and you see the results, even though at times it's frustrating and you're, 6 weekends in a row, I think we were up at the house, the results are really worthwhile. And it's nice to see something that you've, worked hard to accomplish.
Hi, I'm Wyatt.
And I'm Grace.
And you're listening to Our Dad and your host of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Sean Moore, and I'm here with my main man, Graham Hardy. And we're talking about these conversations of short-term rental investors diving into the game, walking into this game, and really just talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And Graham, I always, before we hit record, I always say this, we're just going to have a conversation about the journey. You've been knee-deep into acquisition, setup, today's launch day on a brand new short-term rental, our first short-term rental. And so I appreciate you joining us, and we're going to have a conversation about what this journey's been like for you so far.
Thanks, Sean. I'm excited about it.
Absolutely. So, Graham, I always like to start with the backstory. I love hearing somebody's background because, I've talked to investors and we work with investors across the country, and we have for so many years, and everybody's story is just a little different. And it's always nice to hear that, sometimes, where somebody's background is, what got them interested in real estate investing in the first place. And, and this is your first short-term rental that we're going to be talking about and diving into the game. And so love to start to talk about kind of where what do you do for a living? What's the family situation like? What got you interested in short-term rentals? And then we'll go from there and we'll dive into the details of the journey.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm about as far from real estate investing as you can imagine. I've been in software engineering for 20 years or more, but I work in kind of a cool space. I work in the smart home space. So I work for a company called Snap One, and we make a bunch of smart home products. If you hire a professional AV installer to install something, it's a good chance you have some of our products in your house. Control4 is one of our most well-known brands. And my teams, work on all the software that make that come to life. So the things you can do in a home to create a tremendous experience is kind of what I've lived and breathed the last 10 years. But I got into this. I've always wanted, there was really two main reasons why we started to approach this as a family. And I have a wife and I have two boys that are 13 and 11. I wanted, first of all, to diversify my portfolio. I had always invested in businesses or stocks, never really in the real estate space, and had wanted to get into real estate for years, was kind of the one main reason. The second one was I wanted to give my wife a job, which sounds kind of funny, but our youngest son has special needs. And so because of his care, he has Down syndrome. And so because of his care, it takes a lot of time for my wife, taking him to school and everywhere. But she's loved designing and decorating homes. And I thought, hey, this is a good opportunity to give her something to do sort of as a part-time work. So those are kind of the two main reasons why we wanted to get into this space.
Nice. And when you got into, you looked, I'm assuming you looked at different asset classes. Tell me if that's wrong or correct me at any time. But
I would say not significantly. I think, flipping houses didn't interest me. I don't have the skill set to do that. I had thought about long-term rentals, but that just didn't get me excited. And through COVID, commercial kind of was a little scary. So there was a specific trip we have rented Airbnbs and short-term rentals for years. We're in North Carolina. We go to the beach, we go to the mountains, we rent them all the time. There's a specific trip we did in August of last year. My wife had a girls' weekend in Wilmington, North Carolina, and I was taking the boys, and we were going to Wilmington also. And in the last minute, the host got COVID, and so she was scrambling to find an Airbnb. And that one was a little bit unique, Sean, because it was a first-time Airbnb. It was like their first listing. And so we kind of she experienced it in a little bit different way. And I remember walking around Wilmington that August and thinking, why is this not a space I'm investing in? Like, this seems like, a neat area to get involved in. And so that kind of kicked it off. I came back from that weekend and, like I normally do, started diving into investigating it and found your great marketing because your marketing is phenomenal. And Sean, I must have listened to 30 hours of your podcast within the first 2 weeks, everything from the tax piece, the design piece, how to, underwrite properties, and kind of getting a very broad perspective of the short-term rental space and how to approach it. But it was really about 2 weeks after that, I was out in Seattle. My boss and I were at an Amazon executive briefing in downtown Seattle. And we had been walking around town, and he was telling me a little bit about his time in the restaurant business and, the learnings and how much growth he had of it. And I was telling him about my new recent interest in short-term rentals. And we were standing at the corner on this dock at Puget Sound looking out, and he's like, you should do this. Like, it was really his push on me to say, like, you should really do this. Like, you'll approach it from the right angle, you'll dive in deep, you'll do all the things that you do. And so that was really the impetus to kind of, what you might say, jump over the cliff, or to kind of lead into taking the first steps.
Nice. That's interesting. And, your boss had, worked with you, has known you well, and said, just he knew your, like, the way that you're built, how you're going to approach it. And I can, it's always, you and I have talked, and I've even told you this before, is one of the things that makes me the happiest is when somebody takes kind of the things that we're talking about and the process and the plan that we have laid out and really executes. And you really rolled up your sleeves and really got into executing. I love also, and it's so common with people who have success in anything, but as a coach, we see it firsthand. When you have your most successful, people that you work with, they're the type that they listen with the intent to understand rather than listening with the intent to respond or do something with it, right? They want to understand it. And that's, if I could put it in a nutshell, one, you really, really execute, but you also really dive into everything with the intent to understand it. And I think that really shows how you go through this process. And it's been really fun for me to watch and be a part of that journey. And you're just, we'll talk about the journey and the ups and downs of that journey, but there's, when you dive into it that way, you're able to navigate those hard turns, right? And the bumps in the road, because they're always there. And, I think that your boss saw something in knowing you for, as long as he probably has and working with you. And he's like, hey, you're going to make a go of this. You really ought to do it. And so it's interesting that you dove right into short-term rentals, and, the other asset classes weren't really that attractive to you. And so where you're just saying, hey, listen, because that's not as common either. A lot of people, will start with other asset classes that are more traditional, and then they realize what they, didn't like about them, or they get attracted to another asset class like a short-term rental. So it's interesting to me that you really wasn't interested in that.
The reason, probably, Sean, I've always loved to travel, and the travel aspect and being able to learn and understand an area, it's something we as a family have always loved to do. When I travel someplace new, it's like exhaustive research to find out all the right restaurants and everything. So it fits really, really well with short-term rental. And I'd say the other aspect too that was like, when I approached this, I knew I had the aptitude to learn it. But it was really about, did I want to take the time frame, maybe the 2-3 years it would take it to learn it, and kind of the hard knocks and the things that you do when you're learning anything? Or do you want to embrace like a much more accelerated pace? And that was really my approach to the Vodyssey group was, hey, this is a really way to accelerate that pace if you just simply follow the process and do it. And so it was really then easy to dive in deep and just say, let me eat up everything I can, so that I can learn this as fast as I can, basically.
Awesome. So what is the time frame? Let's make sure that we kind of follow that timeline as people are listening into this conversation. Like because I know the timeline, but let's bring everybody up to speed.
Yeah, it was pretty quick and probably a little stupid in a couple of areas, but it's worked out pretty well. So we in August joined the Vodyssey group. Went through the course in like 2 weeks, I think was roughly the time frame it took us to do it. Started looking at properties, and we're in Charlotte, North Carolina, and my wife was sort of like, well, what about the beach? And I said, yeah, that kind of scares me. I said, what about the mountains? That makes me a little bit more less scared. And so we decided to kind of look at mountain properties. So we looked kind of your major areas in our region, which are the Smoky Mountains, kind of Banner Elk, Boone area here in North Carolina. Those were areas we traveled to, as a family. We love those areas. We also felt a lot more comfortable doing something regionally than, doing this, halfway across the country. And so that was a big part. So we specifically looked in those areas. We found a few properties in the Bryson City, North Carolina area. That area we had actually never spent extensive time in, but we liked the area from the outdoors aspect. The North Carolina side of the Smoky Mountains, if you're familiar with, tend to be more outdoorsy. And so Bryson City was really appealing to us. So actually, the second house we looked at, I did a trip there, had scheduled 2 or 3 properties. The second house I looked at, it didn't wreck my Audi, which the first one almost wrecked my Audi. But it was it had a lot of potential to it. This was a home that somebody had for sale. They had continued to discount the price for different reasons, and they had found a buyer, but the buyer had fallen through because of inspection challenges. And so he was in the middle, though, of fixing all those inspection-related issues, including some foundational ones. He was, trying to get it relisted when we came along. And I had sort of done this once before with our own home, where we had found kind of call it a diamond in the rough type scenario, but we're willing to see through that. And the thing this house had to it is amazing views. It has straight line views of the Smoky Mountains. You can sit there and look out, but we had to remove a lot of trees to get that view. And it needed to be upgraded. Built 20 years ago, hadn't been touched in 20 years. And so we had a little bit of a construction project ahead of us, but it had a lot of potential. It has an unfinished basement that we could finish out. And so we went through, negotiated through it, offered considerably less. He took it from us. And we were literally in September under contract and purchased it at the end of October 19th, I think is when we purchased it. Pretty quick timeline from, hey, this is a good idea in August to October, we own a property. And because learning the Vodyssey way of doing this and approaching the design element and how we wanted to do that was new to us, we basically left it rented for the rest of the year. We left it with its existing property manager, didn't do anything, just kept it consistent, which, as you know, has a lot of good tax benefits by keeping it listed. So we spent the rest of the year essentially planning, shut the property down on January 1st, and handed it over to the construction people. We renovated 2 bathrooms, the kitchen, did we replaced the doors, things, lots of cosmetic pieces to it, completely furnished it. And basically in a little over 2.5 months or so, basically did the whole thing, a lot ourselves as far as the staging aspects, but we, hired construction to do it. And it's turned out really, really well. We just finished the photographs. Like you said at the beginning, we're ready to be listed today or tomorrow, and are off and running, within, I think, 6 or 7 months of time frame.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it was, it feels so accelerated when you've never done it before, right? And it's, and you were able to dive in and have the confidence because you guys dove in right into our mentorship program, our coaching program, and you're surrounded by other people doing it. The process is kind of laid out, but you had to execute on this and dive in. And, you said when you bought it, in October, closed in October-ish, and then the rest of the year, we didn't really do a lot on it. That time was, used for planning purposes, right? There's a lot to do to get everything organized when you're going to do any sort of a remodel or any sort of a relaunch, when you're doing a remodel and a refurnish and everything else, right? It's not like you're just watching the time, tick by, right? There's a lot that goes on to that.
That was when Laura's job really kicked in because now she, had a budget to go furnish a whole new house, which was exciting for her. So, it was also learning a slightly different design mindset because it's, somebody who's furnished a house previously, when it's your home, you look at it differently than when you're doing it for a short-term rental. And there's things you choose to do. And Mike's part of the course within the Vodyssey group tremendously helped us. I think we watched 160 or so hours of piecing together, what kind of lights do you put in a short-term rental? What, do you replace cabinets? Do you paint cabinets? Like all those kinds of things have a really strong perspective when you're looking at it from an investment perspective. And those were new to us. So we were learning through that whole month, purchasing, getting everything ready. And we did, we literally did one trip up with everything, had everything unloaded. This house has a unique challenge because it's up the side of a mountain. We've had a tow truck moving trucks, and even myself almost get stuck in the driveway. And so getting things there, getting deliveries there was a huge challenge through this because it's so remote. But we had a strategy of how we were going to do it. We knew when we were loading stuff and we were doing things when certain people were taking over. And so it became kind of fun to coordinate all of it through all that time frame.
How did Laura do with where she's got the design background? And like you mentioned, you design a short-term rental much different than you would design your own home or, and sometimes that can be hard because the first design is so subjective, right? We all have preferences and things that we do. And a lot of designers have their style. And then when you're trying to say, okay, I've got to figure this out and I have to be very cognizant of how to do it as a short-term rental, the guest perspective, all of those different things, the investment perspective, and have it all to come together. I'm curious how, because that can sometimes be a challenge, right? There's a lot of give and take there.
Yeah. and a few minor fights in there too. Actually, I got a funny story. Apple Watch got me in trouble on one. But yeah, it is a unique mindset. Like I think one of the things around bathrooms and bathrooms, you can design them in a way that's for the broad perspective of people and for the longevity of a property, or you can design them for your personal taste. And I think that was one area that Laura adjusted and saying, you're right, I would like to do this if it were my place, but because it's a short-term rental and we're looking at the longevity of this place, let's do it slightly differently. One funny story, the one that Apple Watch got me in trouble with, is we were going back and forth on something, and I was like, you got to do it this way. And she was so resistant to it. And I was at the gym one morning, and she texts me and basically says, okay, we got to do it your way. And I responded with what the first thing Apple Watch suggested, which is great idea. And the barrage of text that preceded that of, what do you mean great idea? So we had a lot of fun with that aspect too. And the boys got involved too. Like one of the cool things we did at this house, this was our oldest son Jack's idea. The house is entitled Blue Smoke Lodge because Laura's themed it after the term that the Cherokee Indians used for the Smoky Mountains, which was blue smoke. Well, our son Jack had found this kind of subreddit theme around bluebirds that look angry when they have stern faces on them. And so we did this whole bathroom themed in kind of what we called angry bluebirds, which was kind of a fun thing that he did. So yeah, so the whole family got to participate, but it was, like you said, it was a bit of an adjustment mindset and how you look at an investment property different than you might look at your own home.
And I asked that because my wife Teresa, she's very similar in the fact where she struggles when we're designing and trying to furnish some of the properties that we have because she wants likes it a certain way personally, but realizes like that's not really going to work so much on the short-term rental side, which is why we don't design any of our own homes or our short-term rentals, but we do our own homes, right? And so it's because sometimes like she's even said, she's like, I realize that what I'm trying to do in our personal home is not what we want to do in our short-term rentals. And so it's very different. And so when you go through that, that's and you're right on the heels of that. So logistically, you had, the properties in the mountains, it's remote. It's got, it's on those, the dirt roads that are hillsides, and you've got steep driveways and, sharp turns to navigate. And so logistically, that's a challenge. What were some of the other things that popped up? Were there any timing or, in any materials or any furnishings that were back ordered that you're waiting on? Like, what are some of the other challenges that pop up during the setup phase?
I think all of the above. I actually have a funny gas story too, I'll tell you. So yeah, definitely, like we couldn't get deliveries right for anything. Our furniture had to come out a following week because they brought the wrong truck and couldn't get in the driveway. And I think I was on a first name basis with the Lowe's Franklin, North Carolina manager because they misdelivered so many things and couldn't get things right. But I think the absolute funniest story, Sean, was this one. This is kind of just the nature of this setup phase that is, like you've described, short-lived but extremely intense. So this property has a propane tank on it because everything's remote. Well, and it's about $1,000 to fill up this propane tank. So I fill it up in December. Like 20 days later, I get another bill for a fill up for $1,000. And I'm like, wait a second, what's going on? So I call the gas company and they send out an emergency guy. It's got to be a leak, $350 charge to come turn off the gas in an emergency. And he does that. And then I don't hear anything for like 2 or 3 days. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? So I call back and he's like, oh yeah, you have a major gas leak. He's like, your lines go up the side of the mountain. He's like, we're going to have to bring heavy machinery up there and rip out all the lines. And I'm like, well, what's the cost of heavy machinery? He's like, oh, like $400 or $500 an hour. And I'm just going, oh my goodness. He goes, what you could do though, that would be easier is he says, you could just replace your entire HVAC unit and we could move a unit closer to the house. He goes, you know what? I'm like 15 minutes from the house. Let me run by there and see if we could move a unit closer to the house. 15 minutes later, he sends me pictures and he goes, and I'm like, dude, that's not my house. So long story short was my problem was like a $250 sensor on my HVAC unit. Somebody's house is in major trouble though. Whatever.
Oh, wow. So the major leak wasn't even your property.
It wasn't my house. He had gone to the wrong house the whole time. So it's things like that, the ups and downs of, and I'm the type of personality that like how much effort can I put forth to make things happen? And in this space, sometimes you do have to be patient. Like things take longer. And as much as you're on a constrained timeline during the setup phase, and you're trying to coordinate everything to a T, some things there are things that are going to happen. So we had things like that, like I'm sure anyone. It was also a very good test for me personally, and I think for my wife and family too, to say like, hey, how much are we willing to extend ourselves? And the learnings with this one, I think we would definitely look at in a second, third, and fourth house, because we'd like to do multiples of these. Much difference from the learnings we gained, but it was fun, Sean, because I think you are a huge advocate of this, of putting in the work. When you put in the work and you see the results, even though at times it's frustrating and you're 6 weekends in a row, I think we were up at the house. The results are really worthwhile, and it's nice to see something that you've worked hard to accomplish.
There is one thing that can make or break your success with short-term rentals, and that's your ability to provide your guests with an amazing night's rest. We're taking all of the guesswork out of selecting the perfect mattress system. Personally, I have these custom mattresses in every one of my short-term rentals. We love them so much that we even got them in our own personal homes here in Utah. So visit VodysseysleepSystem.com and use the promo code PODCAST. It's all caps at checkout to get 55% off.
Sometimes in the middle of it, we don't realize that. We don't appreciate that till we kind of look back. And I think I wish that, and I'm the same way. Like I don't know that in the middle of the storm, I don't really look around and think, I'm glad that I'm going through this, but when you're done with the storm, you are glad you went through it because you're stronger, right? And you learned a lot and you know a lot. But in the middle of it, I wish I was better person to be able to look around and be like, yeah, I'm learning a lot right now, but I don't do it in the middle of the storm. I'm just mad, right? I'm like, I want to get through this storm.
There were two quotes that I kind of held. One was one you mentioned to me where you said, if it were easy, everyone would have amazing properties. I think that was a good one. The other one is from a book I think you've read, which is Unreasonable Hospitality. And in there, he makes a wonderful quote that I kept, and the quote is, adversity is a terrible thing to waste. And so as difficult as this is sometimes, the fact that it's the learnings that you're getting and it's increasing, your overall knowledge of an area, and it's invaluable, right? You would never give that up. And so I think as people go through the difficult of a complex setup like this, to me, those were two things I kind of kept in mind, is like, you're doing it for a purpose. Don't waste the experience and what you're learning here, because it will prove better in the long run.
And we do talk, and you mentioned this before, that setup phase, the acquisition phase, they're short-lived, right? In the grand scheme of things, these are long-term investments. Those are short-lived front-end parts of the journey and parts of the process that we have to go through. And the more work you put in it during that stage, the better that asset's going to perform long-term, right? And so, and it's always really fun. And the reason I love these conversations the most, Graham, is because everybody goes through those struggles, right? When you're going through it, it's easy for me to say, from the outside looking in, hey, this is short-lived, Graham. You're going to be fine. Just, keep rolling through, keep battling through. But because sometimes when we're in the middle of it, especially the first one, if all we hear is all the really good success stories, and not that this is going to be a great success story, but if all we ever hear is how much money everybody made on their launch and how much money they're making on this property, and then you're in the middle of this storm sometimes, we're like, well, what's wrong with me? Like, what am I doing wrong, right? There must be something wrong with what I'm doing. And that's not the case. It's kind of it is the process that has to happen in order for you to have those success stories at the end of the day. And when a property comes together, you can look back and say, man, that was worth it.
Yeah. One of the in that first 30 hours of podcasts of yours I would listen to, I think, is the example of, I forget the gentleman's name in Yosemite, whose house burned down and had to go, ask family members for more. And his excitement about the industry, I think I kept going, okay, it's not that bad. We haven't, our house hasn't, and the excitement of getting through even the most difficult of situations, because there is a lot of reward in this space. And I think we're starting to see that.
Yeah, I love it. So we got that. We got it. We got the photos, and then again, like the way that we do everything, right? It seems like everything is takes longer than we want it to take. But especially you're built a lot like me. Like I just am like, okay, I've done the work. Now just let me put it live and let me make some money with this property, right? And I want to go. And so today, you've been waiting on photos for a little while. We're like, man, I wish I would have launched April 1st, I think was the original date, right? And we're second week of April now, so we're a little behind. But those 8 to 10 days feels like an eternity, right? And like we say, it's kind of short-lived, but we're like, texting and emailing back and forth, like, man, let's get this sucker going. And so today is the launch day, and I've seen your photos. You started putting them on your direct booking site, and so I've had a chance to see them. But it'll be really nice to see how this launch really goes. Right? We've been strategizing on the launch going into the summertime.
It is, yeah. I don't think we started this, Sean, with the intent of saying, hey, let's go, try to do the top property in this specific market. But I think as we've gone along, I think we feel like it's possibly believable to do it because we followed the process, we've done it. And so, again, that wasn't, I think, our intent. We were more being conservative, saying, hey, let's just not lose money on this and let's try to build a lifestyle asset for the future with long-term vision. But I think following the process and kind of going through each piece of the puzzle and being able to really commit to it, I think we have the potential. And you and I have talked about that. Yeah, like if we do this right, we could definitely be towards the top part of this market. So we're excited about that. And now I think is the stuff that I really enjoy: the marketing piece, the e-com aspect of what short-term rentals are. I mean, this is kind of, to me now, like I get to play in the fun side. Not setting up beds and putting lights in. That's not the part I enjoy.
You and I both. This is the stage where I enjoy owning these properties, right? I don't mind the acquisition phase. I love running numbers. I love underwriting deals. I love seeing the potential of a property come to life. I don't like the setup stage personally, right? In fact, at this stage in the game, I hire most of it out, right? I hire the best of the best, and who I've got a team that I will go out and hire a lot of that out. But there is something to be able to be said about just going through that process yourself a time or two, because you really understand it and you really understand what goes into it. You can manage the process a lot better from afar when you do hire it out, when you've actually gone through it. But this stage, launch, marketing, I like that stage. But that's the other stage I really do like. Now, I know that you put together the marketing website. Have you started running ads to it? Have you started testing the waters at all?
We haven't yet. So we're treating this very much like a product launch, because that's kind of my area where it's like we're all set and ready to click the buttons all in one shot to go live with it. So but we've done, like you said, all the work we need to. We just need to get over that final finish line, which should happen today or tomorrow. So
that's awesome. And we're excited for that. You guys know that listen to me regularly. Those of you that are new listeners to the podcast, we always post the properties in the show notes, so you can go check out the properties and the links. And so, I always say success leaves clues. Go reverse engineer what successful investors are really doing. Look at how the areas they're buying. Look at the proximity, what their properties have as far as amenities, how they're setting them up, and go check out Graham's property and how they've set it up. Because and I always say, if you're in those areas, go check them out and stay in them, right? Visit them and be able to see what that experience is like. If you're really serious about this game, that's what we do, right? Like we go stay in properties, we go check them out, we go do, because if we're going to really say, hey, we're going to be investing in short-term rentals, and that's why we post these links in there, and so you can go check those properties out. So Graham, what are the next steps for you guys? I know that we want to build a portfolio. Are you going to try to stay regionally, like you said at first? You wanted to kind of stay in the region where you guys are at, or are we going to what are the goals long term now, and what is that? What is the vision for that portfolio as you continue to build it?
Yeah, I definitely like to do multiples of these. I think, at this very point right now, it's focused on, hey, let's get this launch and be successful first. I'm very conservative with my investing strategy. But yeah, I think this was kind of a test for us to venture into a different market than what we were used to in investing. And I think we'll definitely do more of this. I definitely would like to do one in an international market. My brother and I have already started to talk about that. I think maybe not the next one, but somewhere down the line, I'd like to expand into that. I think one of the things that I've just come to love of this is the whole storytelling aspect of it, of being able to design something about really the experience, understanding which target audience you're going after. This property specifically, my wife did a great job in, and every room is themed after a local area you can visit. The artwork is actually, you can take the hike at the artwork that you're staying in the room at. And we tried to unify that whole theme, and to be able to do that in another location with another whole experience, and be able to dive into that and say what kind of experience do we want to create? How do we want to articulate that? I think that's really an exciting aspect of this. And it's such a missing part of the short-term rental space. People aren't doing that. They're just, like you've said numerous times, they're just putting a house up, a listing, and it can be a nice home, but they're not articulating an experience that people can dive into and can envision and want to stay there. And so I'm just looking forward to like, what other creative things can we do in that, with the next one or future ones.
Yeah. I want to put an exclamation point on that and we've said this so many times, and I find it so interesting that we're in the hospitality space. We're in the experience space, and it is so few and far between that you find property investors and owners that have properties that they actually create an experience and articulate that experience. It feels like there's a lot of really good, like great properties out there, good proximity, good locations, but they're not doing a great job of really articulating what they have in that experience and really telling the story with the property. And it is one of the most exciting things for me in this space, and it continues to be. And it's shocking to me as the platform that we have, and as many people as we're able to talk to, and I feel like we've got a pretty good finger on the pulse of what goes on in the short-term rental industry at this stage, is because of the exposure that we've got. And as much as I talk about it, it's still shocking to me the small percentage of investors who actually create an experience and articulate that experience instead of just trying to throw up a property and sell the property. And it is why we're able to make so much more money than maybe your neighbor with arguably sometimes. I had a neighbor that I always talk about my fly fishing property because I knew the numbers on my neighbors and mine. And we were making double what our neighbor was making. And they had arguably a way better property on the same lake as us right next door. And we made double the money because they were just selling the property and we were selling an experience. And that was my first real exposure to the difference there.
I think, Sean, this is my take on why it's so difficult to do. You tell me if you agree or disagree. But I think number one is you have to step back and think about the guest first. I think a lot of people are thinking about, how do I just make a property beautiful? But if you think about the guest, that's the first challenge. And the second thing is, and this is to me what Vodyssey helped to accelerate, is how do you go about doing it? Like, how do you think about artwork? How do you think about, setting it up in a way like we would not have known how to do that, even if we had the best of ideas. Knowing about how to execute on that would have been really difficult. So I think to me, it kind of goes into the two ones. Either it's like, hey, I'm not really thinking about the right experience for the guests, or I simply logistically don't know how to create that experience. But then putting those two together, man, it fosters all kinds of ideas. Like, oh, wow, we could do this. What about this? And then you got to kind of pay yourself back because you're over budget all of a sudden.
Yeah, exactly. No, I totally agree with you there. And we talk about this a lot internally is, because we're always like, man, a lot of the things we talk about are fairly simple, right? What the conversation you and I are having, it's not rocket science, what we're talking about, but executing it is very difficult. It's a lot easier said than done. And I know this firsthand because when we were trying to articulate like the experience through our photos, it was a full probably year and a half, 2 years that we were trying. I was trying wedding photographers. I was trying commercial photographers.
Oh, yeah.
I was going in all these different industries trying to figure out how to articulate an experience instead of just articulating the real estate. And so I know the execution is hard, even though we knew what we wanted to do. It took us a long time and a lot of money to try to dial in exactly how we were going to execute it. And so what you're saying, I think, is spot on, is that it is a little more difficult to execute than just talk about.
Sean, one other thing I'll mention that I've really appreciated is I came up with a saying. I've tried to Google it a bunch. No one's saying it, so I'm claiming it. I'm trademarking it. But and I learned this from my youngest son, and that is the saying I have is, you can't fake genuine. And our youngest son, who has Down syndrome, a lot of his world is to get him to do things is hype. It's like, Blake, come on, let's get in the bath, let's do this, right? But he can always see through, a non-genuine response. And I will say, like, that was one thing that really attracted me to the Vodyssey group, is just the genuine interest you have in helping people to be successful at this. And I think just your expressions there of like how long it took to figure out how to articulate experience is just a tremendous aspect of that. Or, something that I think we as members have found is like, your weekly call, you stay on that call until every question is answered. And that could be an hour and a half, it could be 3 hours, right? But you're genuinely interested in trying to help us be successful in this. And so it's really been fun and exciting to be part of, something that kind of has all those pieces in play. So then we get to create and we get to do that. And it's been it's a blast to be part of. So much thanks to you and the group for helping us to have that ability to do it.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate it. And we do, like, we truly have so much fun doing it, right? Like it doesn't mean that it's not hard work at times. It doesn't mean that there's times where you're like, man, this is, we're grinding through different things that we're doing, but we love like being a part of the journey and seeing, because like to your point, like you really can't fake genuine, right? And like you said, I love the saying and love the term, and I love where where you're saying, our son can, if I'm not authentic and genuine, he's like, Dad, I'm not buying it, right? I'm not buying it. It doesn't matter what you're saying, I'm not buying it. And I think that we're all built like that, right? To our core, that's how we're all built. And so, yeah, I appreciate that. And it is fun to be a part of the process. And it is, the funnest part is on the flip side of that, like, you have people like you guys that are just diving in, rolling up their sleeves, taking chances, making big moves, and ultimately changing the trajectory of what your options are going to be down the line, right? I mean, you're going to have choices that without some of these moves you might not have had. And, it doesn't mean that we're not going to have some challenges. And that's where we want to make sure that we're there for you along that road as well. But it's fun to be surrounded by people that are willing to do, like, get to work and do stuff, right? I love that. Like I always say that, like, kind of our personal mantra is, that nobody's coming to save us, right? It's our job, to take personal, our personal responsibility and being able to have this, like, to get after it, to build that life that we don't want to take a vacation from. And nobody's there to do it for us. And that's why it's so fun to be around a group of people. And, when I started this, I always thought that, I thought maybe if I could have 100 people that we helped around along the way, it would be kind of fun. And we're a little past 100, so it's pretty fun.
You've got a group of people that have come in that are really all interested in learning, and that means learning from each other. So, like, I've learned so much from other members. Dan Gorman's examples, and Ryan and I in Nashville are talking regularly just about how are you thinking about this, and that group of people that's interested in increasing their knowledge and their learnings is just is a really interesting culture that's fun to be a part of also.
Yeah, it's that growth mindset, right? I mean, there's so much power in proximity. I'm a huge believer in that. And when you surround yourself with people with the growth mindset, and you're around them, and they're willing to, we kind of challenge each other to continue to raise the bar, and it's pretty fun,
Yep.
And so. Awesome, Graham. Well, listen, at the end of, as we start to kind of wrap up our conversation, I always like to go back and, like, say, when you dove into this, like, you jumped in the deep end. When you decided you were going to do it, and I think that's your personality. You're like, if I'm doing it, I'm going all in, and you did that. And so when you look back as you start to build, like you say, you learn some of the lessons along the way. Property number 2 is going to look different than property number 1, and along the way, you're going to learn at every single stage. What would you go back and tell yourself early on? Like, if you could give yourself a piece of advice, if you could say, hey, listen, if I could do something a little different, if I could give myself a piece of advice, what would that be? Is there something that comes to mind there?
Yeah, I think I would tell my slightly younger self, not my young self, but my slightly younger self, to take more calculated risk. I think when we're young, we like to take a lot of risk, but as we get older, it's more painful, or there's more involved. Family members, there's dollars, investments. But I think, the benefit of being older is that you also have the experience, and it's not like when you're young and just taking needless risk. And so that calculated risk to me is one that helps you to continue to grow. And I think, like I used at the outset, I think standing in Puget Sound with my boss telling me you should do this, I don't know that I would have done it had he not kind of given me that, like, little extra push I needed to say, yeah, you need to take more risk, Graham. Like this is a big, something you've ventured into that you don't know, but you can do it. And I think that was what I would probably tell myself, or tell many, many people, our relative age that are, on the verge of wanting to make some different investments, wanting to take some chances, but just feel like they can't get past that analysis paralysis moment of saying, like, let's make the leap. We can take the steps to be successful. So I think that's what I would probably tell my slightly younger self, just to do that a little bit more.
Yeah, I love that. And I appreciate that, because it's one of the things that I see the most. And I love that you said the slightly younger self, because once, we get to our age and you've got a certain level of success and you worked hard to get where you're at, and you're like, man, I don't want to mess this up, right? It took me a minute to get here. And so what happens is we end up sitting on the sideline, and we end up not doing, continuing to really push to move forward, not because we're not capable, but because we kind of have that in the back of our head saying, man, if I screw this up, I don't want to restart today. I don't want to restart right now. And so the other part of that advice is to take calculated risks, right? Don't go put it all on red or black, right? You want to make sure that we're saying, okay, how is there a path where there's a knowledge base there? Is there a path that some people are a few steps ahead of me that I can follow and where I want to get? Is it doable and is it viable? And so that can really help mitigate that risk, right? When you've got the knowledge and you can leverage somebody else's time and knowledge in a game. And I think that's where that calculated risk starts to come in, because it is scary, especially when you've had a certain level of success. And when we're talking about real estate investing, you almost have to have some success in order to go buy assets, right? So it is this, double-edged sword a lot of times with people that we talk to that are trying to get into a game. And there's just a lot of people who will sit on the sidelines for a long time and continue to sit there and, they're like, okay, I made it to this stage, but it's hard to grow past the stage if you're not willing to take those calculated risks.
Yep, that's true.
So
now property number 2.
Awesome, Graham. That's it. Number 2. We'll get that. We'll have a successful launch. Let's get you that launch, get some money coming back in, and then we talk about property number 2.
There you go.
Awesome, man. Well, listen, Graham, I so appreciate your time and your willingness to share your story and get on and have these conversations. It means a lot to so many people, and I know that, like you said, before you dove into the game, you went and listened to a lot of these podcasts, and so it's kind of your way of giving back and letting other people hear that story. And so I appreciate it. And those of you that are listening, as we wrap up these episodes, we know how valuable your time is, and we really appreciate you spending it with us and really trying to walk into this game with your eyes wide open. At the end of all of these episodes, I always ask you 2 favors. The first one is, if you like this show and you know somebody else who might like it, if you could share it and get them involved in these conversations, those things mean a lot to us. They help us spread the message and grow these shows. If you have more than 30 seconds, like, review, give us a thumbs up on whatever platform you're watching or listening on. Those things help us as well. And then the final and most important thing that I always ask you at the end of every episode is to go pick that one thing you can do today to start building that life you don't want to take a vacation from. Cheers, my friends.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. Share this with other people you think need to hear about it. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Hey Grace, is there a website? Yes! For more amazing content and expert advice, visit Vodyssey.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.